Thank you very much, Hope. Thank you, thank you, thank you. The title of today's presentation is The Twilight Zone Year 2, Benefit, Risk, and Hope in Clinical Trials for FOP. Once again, this year I am going to depart from my usual laboratory updates and speak to you from the heart about a topic of ultimate concern to all of us, clinical trials for FOP. I am speaking as a clinician, a researcher, a principal investigator, the chief author of the ICC editorial on clinical trials, and a longtime friend of the FOP community. I'm an optimistic guy, and I'm extremely optimistic about clinical trials. But like climbing Mount Everest, you have to be prepared, you have to be informed, and you have to have good guides. And you have to have an incredibly supportive team, both on the scene and behind the scenes. Recent developments in clinical trials for FOP have left us all feeling as if we are in the Twilight Zone, that natural territory somewhere between the real world and fairyland, as the author Nathaniel Hawthorne described. On the one hand, we have emerging results from some clinical trials that inspire hope, while on the other hand, the same clinical trials have been paused or stopped due to the emergence of very serious adverse events. New clinical trials with new targets are emerging, and the whole skyscape is evolving. How do we reconcile this? How do we accept it? Do we accept it without inquiry as part of the routine of clinical trials, or do we question its very nature? Clearly the latter. We not only have every right, but every obligation to question deeply, and only then can we truly understand the very essence of clinical trials, that elusive bond between risk and hope. We need to take press releases with a grain of salt, especially those that emanate from trial sponsors. We absolutely need to see the data from the trial in peer-reviewed, published papers. Now let's be real. No drug is 100% effective, and no drug is 100% safe. The correct questions are, is the drug effective enough, and is the drug safe enough? We have to scrutinize the full published articles on each study, every line, and between the lines. Some may feel frustrated with clinical trials for a whole host of reasons, while others may feel relief. Some may feel despair, while others may feel hope. Some may feel disappointed, while others may feel lucky, and some may feel confused, while others may feel enlightened. It would not be unusual to feel all these emotions and more as old clinical trials evolve and new clinical trials with new targets close to the cause of FOP continue to emerge. In fact, a whole new palette of clinical trials is beginning to emerge with similar targets, the actual mutated receptor in FOP. And they are emerging from 5 different sponsors, sort of like Coke, Pepsi, Sprite, Dr. Pepper, and Mountain Dew. An important question prevails. Will there be enough patients who are willing to enroll in these clinical trials that will be emerging in the next several years? We are blessed that we have such options, but not all are available at the same time or on every shelf or in every clinic, so to speak. And we won't really know the flavor until we've drunken the whole can. This is a picture taken from the IFOPA website of the 9 clinical trials as of this August, and what phase they are in the Twilight Zone. Seriously, this is a critical time to reflect and take stock of where we have been, where we are now, how we got to where we are now, and where we are going as a community. A notice for a symposium in the journal Nature recently stated, translating cutting-edge technologies into therapies remains a major challenge in biomedical research. The process of transferring promising innovations from the laboratory to the clinic is often tortuous and complex, if not downright frustrating. Unlike in video games, there is a long period when an FOP therapeutic target when an FOP therapeutic target is identified and when it is tested in FOP patients. Clinical trials are not a risk-free journey. A lot can go wrong, and it is not for the faint of heart. We are constantly reminded that there are obstacles along the path, but it is not a journey devoid of hope. Quite the opposite, in fact. There have always been ups and downs. The journey up the mountain isn't always up. Sometimes there are dips and deep descents, but the trajectory is always up, both in understanding FOP and in the pursuit to foster safe and effective medicines. Clinical trials require a pioneer spirit, a real pioneer spirit, and as we know, the arrow doesn't always strike the right target. That's where we are. Let's look at where we have been. The discovery of the FOP gene signaled hope, heralded the emergence of a new grammar for drug discovery in FOP, and importantly, the explosion of interest by the biopharmaceutical world on the well-defined and highly conserved bone morphogenetic, or BMP, signaling pathway. That pathway signaled hope for escape from a prison of bone, but also risk. Like dominoes in descent, the FOP gene discovery enabled the development of genetically correct animal models of FOP, which have been instrumental in testing novel therapeutics for druggable targets. We are very lucky as a community that such an FOP zoo exists, although the animal models are far from perfect. Flies, fish, chicken, and mice are not human beings. Far from it, and we need to interpret results from these in vivo studies with great respect and caution. Animal models have validated the dysregulated BMP signaling pathway in FOP, the pathophysiology of heterotopic ossification in FOP, and the progenitor cells responsible for heterotopic ossification in FOP. They have given us very important clues, but we must interpret them with humility, and we must know their limits. Dramatic basic science discoveries, coupled with a comprehensive understanding of the natural history of FOP and methodologies to detect early heterotopic bone formation, further fueled the advent of clinical trials for FOP. The grammar of investigational drug discovery rapidly became a babel of promising new approaches that were rapidly cast on the stage of human clinical trials, a dazzling place to be for an ultra-rare condition that had existed in the backwaters of medicine for over 3 centuries and for which no approved treatment and no discernible hope previously existed. But beware of good news. As Shakespeare said, roses have thorns and silver fountains mud. While dramatic advances showed that the FOP gene discovery could enable identification of druggable targets, it also revealed that drug development would likely be constrained by an ancient and highly conserved signaling pathway, the BMP signaling pathway, that is redundant and iterative, thus making therapeutic specificity extremely difficult. While the desired goal of targeting the dysregulated BMP signaling pathway in FOP is clearly the prevention of heterotopic ossification, and perhaps even joint degeneration, as revealed in the last year by Will Towler, a graduate student at the University of Pennsylvania, the BMP pathway is critically important in the maintenance and repair of nearly every major organ system: the brain, the heart, the lungs, the intestines, the kidneys, the gonads, and many others, thus expanding the risks of collateral side effects of potentially therapeutic drugs. In addition, there are important logistical considerations and constraints of model systems, not the least of which is that FOP mice are laboratory-raised, pathogen-free genetic clones and are not people with FOP, and thus they do not inherently manifest either the immunologic vitality or the genetic variability that underlies both the range of potential efficacy and the range of potential risks that human beings will inevitably display. Thus, while translational studies are essential to enlighten the way forward, they in no way guarantee an unobstructed path. Potential efficacy and inherent risks, safety risks, need to be weighed, not just at the outset, but continuously through every aspect of a clinical trial, and it is the sponsor's responsibility to make those risks clear, transparent, and understandable to investigators and to patients. Aspirational outcomes of successful treatments may vary from one clinical trial to another, based upon the mechanism of action of the investigational drug and the predetermined primary outcome of a clinical trial, which must be stated clearly and unequivocally before a trial begins. You can have course corrections during a clinical trial, but your final destination must remain the same throughout the journey. Possible long-term benefits of patient involvement in a clinical trial may theoretically include, but are not limited to, decreased flare-ups, decreased heterotopic ossification, preservation of joint mobility, retardation of joint degeneration, liberation of joints ankylosed with heterotopic ossification, pain relief, frequent medical monitoring, increased self-awareness and FOP awareness, improved quality of life, a pioneer spirit, contribution to a greater good, and contribution to future generations. It is well recognized that childhood, not adulthood, childhood is the main battlefield for FOP. So why aren't there more clinical trials for children? The answer lies not in the realm of potential benefits, but in the realm of potential risks, namely unintended and irreversible harm. No one wants anyone, especially children, to be harmed in the war against FOP, and no one wants children to be the victims of friendly fire from untested pharmacologic weapons. If new drugs are effective, and if they are safe for adults, will cautiously move down in age to children. Animal models are not good enough. We all know what happens if we jump the gun. However, it may be possible to test repurposed drugs that have already been approved for other conditions, and those efforts are underway. And in fact, one such drug has entered an FOP clinical trial in Europe, the STOP-FOP trial. Individual participation in a clinical trial must be balanced by a thoughtful consideration of potential benefits and risks. Clinical trials are not proven treatments, but rather an opportunity to determine if a potential therapy is effective and if it is safe. Remember, no drug is 100% effective and no drug is 100% safe. The challenge remains, is the drug effective enough and is it safe enough? Everyone wants an effective treatment, but clinical trials are not treatments. Safety is always the other side of the coin. Drugs may seem safe, but any new medication in a properly conducted clinical trial is always circumspect. Even though it is well vetted, it is not foolproof. There are always risks. As the Dalai Lama said wisely, remember that sometimes not getting what you want is a wonderful stroke of luck. It is a growing sentiment echoed by many FOP patients and parents. In other words, being in a placebo group is not always an unfortunate roll of the dice. It may be a blessing in disguise, really. Potential efficacy is the shiny side of the coin. Potential risk is the flip side. Potential risks may vary from one clinical trial to another. These are assessed based on preclinical toxicology studies in animals, phase 1 clinical trial results in human beings, or knowledge of the mechanism of action of an investigational drug. However, these assessed risks may not be comprehensive, and new risks and new safety concerns may be identified when potential therapies are tested in a real clinical trial. One can predict where the known risks may lurk so that they can be avoided, but it is not always possible to predict where the hidden risks may be and what they may be, or predictably see over their horizon. Common categories of risks include the inconvenience of participating in a clinical trial, especially during a pandemic or post-pandemic, the uncertainty of knowing whether one is initially randomized to a placebo group or a treatment group, the annoyance of side effects, both anticipated and unanticipated, potential allergies to a drug, adverse drug reactions, non-responsiveness to a drug, intolerability of a drug, resistance to possible therapeutic effects, and even possible worsening of FOP despite preclinical data that suggests that the drug being tested may be beneficial. Every drug has side effects, but with investigational drug development for FOP, the spectrum of side effects may not be fully known until the drug is tested in FOP patients, despite extensive preclinical toxicology in animals. Even approved and repurposed drugs may have different side effects in the FOP population than are seen when the same drug is used in other conditions. Potential risks can often be prevented or minimized, but even with safety nets and firewalls in place, certain risks can elude prompt detection. And then there are the unknown unknowns, which everyone dreads. The unanticipated and unpredictable risks that arise out of nowhere and take everyone by surprise. Often these risks are relatively minor, but sometimes, to the consternation of all, they might be harmful or even fatal, and it may be difficult to sort this out or find a common thread, especially if they hasten events that commonly occur. Our early foray into FOP clinical trials reminds us what we knew from the very beginning, that clinical trials are not proven treatments. They are human experiments. They are guided by the best available knowledge at the time the trial was designed, and even modified as the trial progresses. Theoretical benefit and palpable risk must be spelled out in detail in informed consent. Informed consent is not just a quaint formality or a box to be checked. It is a solemn requirement of the sponsor and of the investigator in an ongoing process at every step of the clinical trial journey. Always, always read and reread consent forms. Always question everything. Always follow all instructions, and always report everything. Further, patient safety is hardwired into all FDA-approved clinical trials in the form of an independent Data Safety Monitoring Board, also known as a DSMB, Data Safety Monitoring Board, or DSMB. The DSMB is required for every clinical trial and is comprised of 3 to 6 experts in various disciplines related to the study drug and the trial design. Importantly, all DSMBs have an expert on FOP. Perhaps there should be 2. I personally think so. The DSMB monitors occurrences such as unexpected serious adverse events, or SAEs, and can pause or stop a trial in its track if it detects an unforeseen problem that may be related to an investigational drug. A DSMB can also stop a clinical trial early before the trial is supposed to end if the beneficial effects of the drug are so overwhelming as to suggest that continuation of the trial would not be necessary, or if it was determined that the investigational drug is futile. Thus, the DSMB and the sponsor or regulatory authorities, such as the Food and Drug Administration or the FDA, have the jurisdiction to pause or stop a clinical trial for any reason at any time. And of course, the trial participant has the absolute right to bail out at any time for any reason or no express reason at all. As one sponsor observed, there is not an endeavor on the planet that is more highly regulated than clinical trials. Not even the aviation industry. There is not an endeavor on the planet that is more highly regulated than clinical trials. And that should all give us some hope. Clinical trials, as I have said over and over, are not treatments. Not yet, at any rate. Some may be, and some may never be. It is worth remembering. In fact, one must remember that clinical trials are not treatments. As patients and families are bombarded by possibilities and choices, by good news and bad, where does that leave you? For the moment, and for the second year, in the Twilight Zone, somewhere between an old world of symptomatic management and a brave new world of therapeutic possibilities. And there will be more possibilities and more targets coming our way. That is good news. The ultimate gateway of approved drugs is possible only through clinical trials, and patients who embark on that journey are courageous pioneers. And as we have said before, that the pioneer journey is not without its risks, but we will eventually leave the Twilight Zone, accelerate, and reach our common goal. Patients and parents must always be aware that there are risks, some known and closely monitored, and some unknown and clearly unexpected and unpredictable, the unknown unknowns, as I've said. So how should patients and investigators proceed? Obviously with caution, but not paralyzed by fear. Obviously with hope, but also with humility for the unknown. Novel therapies can emerge only from an FOP community working together. Without clinical trials, there will be no approved treatments, and all our efforts will be in vain. We must advance not just with the power of our collective intellect, but with the intellect of our collective power as a community. And as a community, we have the ability to hit the accelerator pedal or the brake, but only if we act together. Otherwise, we will strip the gears of progress and caution, as the two are linked. It is futile to move uphill without an accelerator, but foolish to go downhill without a brake. And in clinical trials, there are hills and there are valleys. You need both. We must move forward, not just with blind hope, but with a well-informed and clearly cited caution, not with a red light or a green light, but with a yellow light constantly blinking. We must join ranks, not just with vigor, but with vigilance. This is the necessary tension of our time in FOP and of our community. It is the only path forward. So what is the take-home message? As of last year, there are two. First, and you have seen this before, and it is worth repeating over and over again, clinical trials are not treatments. They have the potential to become treatments if, and only if, they prove efficacious and safe. They must be both. Each patient or parent must weigh the potential benefits as well as the potential risks of enrolling in a clinical trial and decide for themselves if it is right for them. And if it is, then which trial is right for them, with ongoing informed consent as the guiding light, it is a deeply personal decision. Second, clinical trials are the only path to an approved treatment, and it is a difficult path. Make no mistake about it. But without knowledge, we are left in the dark. We need efficacy and we need safety. We all have an abiding hope and belief that well-designed and meticulously conducted clinical trials will be the path that will lead us there. We are encouraged that so many pharmaceutical and biotech companies are developing novel therapeutics for such a rare and complex disease as FOP, and that they are doing this with care and responsibility and at great risk to themselves. But the pharmaceutical companies are not soothsayers, and they do not have the last word. You do. You do as patients. Side effects, adverse effects, and even unanticipated effects will inevitably occur. Again, no drug is 100% efficacious and no drug is 100% safe. Nobody wants these side effects, but in every case they will be monitored and investigated by the sponsors and researchers to determine if and how they are related to the investigational drug. And that may not be immediately obvious, as we have seen in some clinical trials. If questions are not answered to your satisfaction, then do not enroll. And if you do enroll, you must report everything, and I mean everything. That's one reason it is essential to have placebo groups. And if and when risks are identified that may be related to the investigational drug, appropriate risk management measures and mitigations will need to be rapidly incorporated into further iterations of the clinical trial in order to ensure ongoing patient safety. And again, question everything. If questions are not answered to your satisfaction, then make sure you speak up. You are not hostage. You can leave a trial for any reason at any time. Scientists, doctors, patients, clinical research personnel, pharmaceutical companies, and regulatory authorities must and will continue to work together to make clinical trials as safe, transparent, and successful as possible. This vigilance to safety and transparency on everyone's part will lead us together through the Twilight Zone to a better life. In summary, clinical trials are painstaking processes that weigh potential benefits to the patient and society against potential harm to the individual enrolled. And they are based on painstaking laboratory work on the part of many that has paved the way in FOP laboratories around the world. Clinical trials are a bold step into the future, along a path like no other, a path that is hopeful, with obstacles to be sure. But as someone famously said, obstacles along the path are not obstacles, they are the path. Together we will get there. That is our hope.